you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Where are you?
Everything's great, man. I love the new album. It's an honor to meet you and to talk to you. So thank you for taking a minute out.
Absolutely. Where are you based?
I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, the cradle of jazz.
Beautiful. I love it. I love Kansas City.
It's a great set. Yeah. So you've spent some time here?
A little bit. I mean, I've played there, a dozen times or more.
Right on.
Yeah.
Where are you?
My dog is from Kansas City. He's a rescue from Kansas City.
Oh, cool. So what facility was it? Wayside Waves?
What's the facility called? There's a woman who rescues Aussies who are double merles, which means they're deaf, and she saves saves them from irresponsible breeders and whatnot. So cool. That's where he was, and he's amazing.
I love it.
He's here with me now.
I was just on a podcast yesterday with someone talking about rescue animals and just the animals in general. There used to be a donkey that was here in the town that I'm in Grandview, and everybody loved it. It was like a rock star. People would feed it and love it, and we were talking about rescue, so it's so cool that you brought that up. It's very timely.
Yeah, it's called Barking Dogs.
Right on. Very
Elise
cool.
Is her name.
Well, I'm going to keep this in here because I want them to have a shout out for sure. So it's
all right.
It's good, but it's wonderful to meet you. I'm looking forward to getting into the new album. So thank you, sir. Thank you
Absolutely.
for taking a minute out.
You bet.
So this is the first album since 2017, full of originals. We're coming out of this pandemic. The world's in a weird place. How good does it feel to have new music out?
Feels great. The last album was by request, which was a cover album, came out in 21, and it was a lot of fun. It was great to be able to do it, but I had already written a couple of these songs. I was ready to go with a new album, but the timing wasn't right. And coming out of the pandemic, it was a little strange. And then I embarked on the Croce Plays Croce tour, which got bigger and bigger as it went along, and so it was like time flew. 3 years flew by, and then bam, here we are. And by that point, because I write a little bit every day, I was really ready. I had plenty of material and had tried most all of it out on the road, and had a really good sense of arrangements for everything. And so when I walked into the studio with Shooter Jennings, it was ready to go.
So speaking of the pandemic and coming out of it, are you sensing that crowds, that whole mystique of seeing live music is fade away? Or are you still feeling that there's a different energy that happens with the intermingling between performer and crowd?
It's hard to say. I think there was a certain thing in 22 and 23 where it was, people were excited to be in the presence of live music. But I still feel that, I still feel it. And I think that there's a facet of what I do that is kind of unique in that there's a good amount of storytelling involved, not just in the songs, but in the whole concept of the show. So I think there is built into what I do, there's a certain connection that I have with the audience, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. No, it totally does. So I'm curious, speaking of the audience, what are you ultimately hoping the listeners get from Heart of the Ethereal? What's your hope?
Well, it's Heart of the Eternal, and there is ethereal aspects to it, certainly. Yeah. I think it's a pretty interesting piece. It's very diverse, but it really holds together. I hope that people enjoy the irreverence and musicality. I hope they enjoy the songs. I hope they dig the arrangements and the beauty of the music as much as groove to the rocket tracks as well.
I apologize for that Freudian slip because I was thinking this is an ethereal recording. So
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. I recently ran into somebody here in Kansas City that is a harmonica virtuoso, and
Uh-huh.
B.B. King plucked him out of a crowd at age 11. His name is Brody Buster, and said, "You are going to be you are the greatest harmonica player of our generation at 11." And my question to you is this: you come from a legendary father.
Hmm.
B.B. King has been a part of your orbit.
Hmm.
How much of being in these enormous casts of music light has helped you find your voice and who you are and be uniquely you in this music industry?
It's a really good question, and I don't think anyone's asked it quite that way. I would say it helped immensely. It helped me in a way that might be a little bit different than other folks because of my father. In spite of my father, in some ways, um, I had opportunities uh, early on for people to at least listen to what I was doing. It came about in a way with first with Floyd Dixon, who heard me, and then Mae Axton heard me, who wrote Heartbreak Hotel and called Cowboy Jack Clement, had him hire me, replacing Jerry Lee on my first session at 17, and then BB King heard me. These people were not hiring me because I could fill seats. They were not hiring me because I was going to be singing my father's music. They hired me because I was capable of doing the job they needed, and they liked what I did. So, from Willie Nelson to Ray Charles and James Brown and all of the amazing artists that I was fortunate enough to work with, or open for, or have them take me under their wing and encourage me to be the artist that I am, made a huge difference. It was their stamp of approval, said a lot. And still to this day, people ask me about BB, and I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was 18 on that tour, turning into 19 years old, and then and with the Nevilles, I mean, we must have done 80 shows together, and it's funny. My the bass player in my group, David Berard, I've known since I was 19. He kind of preceded me in a lot of those groups. He played bass with the Nevilles. He was with Dr. John for almost 40 years, and when he wasn't with Mac, he was with Etta James, who I had the opportunity to play with, and of course the Nevilles, and Alan Toussaint, who I was fortunate enough to work with and become friends with. All of these people we kind of connected through, and it's funny that we reconnected, about a dozen years ago, and he's been playing with me ever since, and recording with me, and it's funny how those connections still are relevant to this day, and I'm in my 50s, so
Yeah.
it's crazy.
So I'm curious, with all these legendary cats and just people that have been around for a long time, they operated as role models for you. And now at your stage, you operate as a role model to younger cats that you get around. What do you try to teach the younger musicians about singing, songwriting, the road, being a musician?
you know um there's a lot. There's a lot there. The most important thing is to stay really open, to not close yourself off to anything stylistically, genre wise, era wise. Get to know it. The broader your tastes, um, and the broader your musical interests as far as genres and eras and styles of playing, the greater your color palette as a musician, as a songwriter, as a performer. Um, I think it's really important to be fearless. You have to make mistakes. The only way you get great is by learning from your mistakes. They might be small little mistakes and getting from point A to point B, on a song. It might be a solo you make a mistake on. You can practice all day long, 24 hours a day in your bedroom, and you will still not be prepared for playing live. So the other thing I try and tell everyone that asks me is to play live, whether it's busking, whether it's playing standards in a for brunch, or whether it's playing clubs, or whatever you can do. The other thing is you got to stay humble, because this industry it's a roller coaster ride. This line of work is heartbreaking. So you can't be afraid of hearing no, because you're going to hear it more than anything else. And you have to understand that you may have a break, and you may do really well for a period of time, but there'll come a moment when people are tired of hearing that. They want to hear something else. And there'll be a period of time where it's harder you'll always have those core fans, but you're going to have to build from that and do something new and creative and reinvent yourself. So I think never being feeling like you're too good to play a wedding, or too good to play a funeral, or too good to play anything. I came into this because it's a calling. I love what I do, and I'm so grateful to have the right personality to endure the humiliation, for lack of a better word. How many gigs I played where you're at two, playing at the volume level of 2, and they ask you to turn it down, and then they ask you to turn it down again, and it's like, well, they don't really want to hear music here. They just want background music, and even that is too loud. So why even bother? Just get a DJ and turn the volume the level you want it. It'll be a lot cheaper and less humiliating. But I got over that. I got over that ego factor, and everyone's been there. It doesn't matter who it is. I remember playing a show with Taj Mahal, and it was a private event, and he was coming in to play the second set. I was playing the first set, and in between, we were label mates at the time, and we had played shows together, and had actually played together where I played piano and he played guitar and sang, or we did stuff together. And I remember saying to him, I said, this audience they just don't, I must have been 19, 20 years old. This audience does not care about us. They're here to talk about something else altogether. It was in Washington, D.C. And he's like, yeah. He had been in 100 situations like that. And he said, let's just have fun. And I remember just the two of us playing together, doing four-handed boogies and old Mississippi John Hurt songs, and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee stuff, and old rock and roll of all varieties, and old jazz standards. And I threw stuff at him, and he'd throw stuff at me, and it ended up being so much fun for us, and no one could have given a shit about what we were doing. No one.
So I'm curious, was it always music for you? Did you have any other desires or dreams, or think your life was going to turn out any differently? Or was it kind of in your DNA, sewn into you, that music was going to be your life?
When I was in my early teens, I had some ambition to sort of pursue a career possibly in cultural anthropology.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated with folklore and history and archaeology, and I think that I even went to some great universities to look at possibly doing that. But honestly, by the time I was 15, I was making good money. I was playing 4 or 5 nights a week. The only expenses I had were gas for my car, yeah, and insurance for my car, and that was about it. Yeah. So I was still living at home, and so I kind of had this sense by the time I was in my late teens, there was no doubt that's what I was doing. Between the there was a moment between the BB King tour and releasing my first record, which in hindsight flew by, but it just seemed like it took forever, So like I finished that tour, I was 19, and um and I when I started it, I didn't have a manager, I didn't have an agent, didn't have I had a publisher, um and and I didn't have a label. So by the time that finished, I had an agent, I had a manager, and things were starting to move, but it was still early, And so I was playing a lot around town in San Diego and Los Angeles, and just playing as often as I could, taking every gig I could, and it seemed like forever, but once I got signed, it was it was like I got shot out of a rocket or something, It was really amazing. I mean, I was on the road with some of the most iconic artists. I was getting invited to play with some of the most iconic artists, and I thought like, oh, this is gonna last forever, kind of thing. And then after my second record, my label got. I mean, I was on BMG, I was on RCA and most of the world, but my label got folded into another label, which was not appropriate for my music, and it was the beginning of being an independent artist. And it's ironic, after 32 years or more, I'm back on BMG. It's such a different company than when I left. When I was there, they owned RCA and Arista and dozens of other companies that were amazing, historic labels. And now now they're like a big indie, with great distribution.
That's why, my stepdaughter asked me a few years ago when I turned 50. She was like, "What have you realized about hitting this milestone?" And I'm like, "Life is a big carousel. And if you haven't dealt with things, you're going to come back to it,
Yep.
or you're going to run into it again." And like with the label, I mean, that's the poetry of life, man. It's
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is. And like I said, it's about this business being a roller coaster. It really is. It's just that you have to be ready for it. If you don't pay your dues up front, you're gonna pay them later.
yeah.
Even if you do pay them up front, you're gonna pay them later. It's just part of the gig. It's part of the gig, um, and I think there's not an artist out there that hasn't gotten to. I mean, it may seem less difficult for someone like McCartney or the Rolling Stones, but when they went out and started doing their own thing, it was not the Beatles or the Stones. When Keith Richards does his own thing, he's not playing stadiums,
Yeah.
And so every one of them, if they want to do exactly what they want, and they're not doing it for the fans, they're doing it for themselves, well, they're going to see fewer fans. It's just the nature of the work. And so the more you play for the audience, the greater opportunity you have to reach a greater audience.
So I see Billy back there. I see posters, and I'm thinking of all these musicians that have been influential on all of us. Who were you
Yeah.
listening to early on that helped you find your voice or made you think, I want to kind of emulate and be that?
Well, Ray Charles was my gateway drug.
Yeah.
He was like, so. As a kid, my father's record collection was really great. Probably 1,000 records deep. I would say 85% of it was great.
Yeah.
There was, Fats Waller and Bessie Smith, Mississippi John Hurt, Blind Blake, and you name the old blues artists, great old folk. There was the Harry Smith folk anthology, which had all that stuff, and the string bands. There was, great soul music. Otis Redding and Solomon Burke and Sam Cooke, who my father absolutely loved and covered regularly. It was a really great record collection, and so all of that stuff played a role when I was young. And of course, losing my sight when I was 4 really encouraged me to find other, or people around me to introduce me to other blind musicians. So Ray Charles was the first, because I was a piano player, or I liked to play piano at that age. And then Stevie Wonder, and there was, all of those blues guitarists, and I didn't play guitar until I was in my 30s, but it all made there was all made sense of it, and Alan Toussaint was hugely influential, not just as a piano player, but really as a songwriter, producer, arranger. My mother used to sing me a bedtime song that was one of his, working in the coal mine, and I remember hearing the Lee Dorsey version as a kid, and loving it. But it was Irma Thomas. I was 13 when Stranger Than Paradise came out, Jim Jarmusch movie, and I lived just like 4 blocks from a art house cinema that had that stuff, played those kind of movies. And I went, and I had to know everything about who did that. I was 13, I needed to know who's singing it, who wrote this, where does music like this, how does this come about? And I knew Fats Domino, I knew Little Richard. It was like, those were like life-changing, artists to discover as a kid. But, and then I can't, there's all of those great old artists that I mentioned, but there was also a ton of 60s stuff that was super influential. And, of course, the English stuff, the Kinks and the Beatles and the Stones and the Yardbirds and all of that music, it took me years to like appreciate certain groups like Zeppelin, because I just initially thought it was kind of a ripoff of Great American Blues. And then one day I heard it and was like, oh, they did their own thing, just like the Stones did. And they did a great job. And it's iconic and beautiful. I think there was, the Faces, the Small Faces, and all of that great rock and roll. And then in the 70s, growing up in the 70s, like we did, I had a little transistor radio by my bed, like one of those small little ones. And it was set to like the Mighty 690. It was an AM top 40 station in San Diego, and it came from Tijuana. And I would run down to the piano and play along to whatever was on there that sounded great. So like Elton John and ELO and Harry Nilsson and the Rolling Stones and John Lennon and McCartney, and anything that I was hearing that was on the radio in the 70s. I remember Bowie, of course. That was really interesting stuff. Queen and playing along to those piano parts. It introduced me to a different way of thinking about playing. I couldn't really fully conceptualize it until I was much older. In hearing someone like David Bowie, who was such a unique artist as a whole, as an artist, and an amazing, eccentric writer. Some of it's very, some of it's very, very unique, because he's not necessarily a piano player, doesn't think of the instrument the way I think of the instrument. The way that I grew up listening to Fats Waller and learning those old stride things, and then relating that to how it turned into Monk. I mean, Monk was hugely influential. Mose Allison was really influential. and an artist who was like kind of like a copy of Mose Allison named Georgie Fame, who was also an English artist who played B3, but really modeled his sound a lot off of that Mose Allison vibe. John McLaughlin was in that band in the '60s. That was his first recording, were with Georgie Fame and Blue Flames. That stuff made a difference, but it was soul music that really got me. '60s Stax and Motown, Muscle Shoals, and it was that era of '50s and '60s music that really informed me. Besides, of course, the early stride that was my launching pad in a lot of ways. Because once I traced Ray Charles back through, Charles Brown and Nat Cole trio and all of that stuff, I'm back with James B. Johnson, Willie the Lion Smith, Fats Waller. The next generation was Art Tatum and Oscar Peterson. But going back further to Jelly Roll Morton and Armstrong and all of that stuff, it was really profoundly influential. And it was, Fats Waller was really unique to me because he was so gifted at multiple things. He could have just been a singer. Yeah. He could have just been a comedian, and he would have been funny. Yeah. He would have been huge. He could have just been a piano player for someone else and would have been a legend. And he could have just been a songwriter, and he would have been one of the most, iconic songwriters of the 20th century. So put it all together and you're like, wow, this is possible. You know what I mean? Yeah. Country music made an impact, especially the, Lefty Frizzell and Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys and Hank Williams and that era of 40s and 50s and 60s country that, I really embraced and just saw the beauty in. And it's interesting also in thinking about the jazz influences was that, so many jazz artists, with, like Charlie Parker, who lived where you are, and Jay McNeely and all those Kansas City guys, Basie and so forth, Benny Motten, and the history of those guys, they were listening to country radio. That's what was on the radio, in Missouri, so it was, people get so hung up on genres instead of just what's great. Yeah. Is it good? Yeah. And if it's good, that's all that matters. It's like Ellington said, there's two types of music. Yeah. There's good music and bad music. That's it.
That's right, dude. Are you familiar with Matthew Whitaker? He's a blind man. He's blind. He's a jazz pianist. He's unreal. He's a prodigy. And I saw him come through town. He's unreal, man. He like oscillated between a Hammond B3 and his piano, and he was shouting. He was channeling like Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, yeah.
It was the beautiful thing about this guy is he is so positive. He is a ray of light that's impenetrable. And I get the music and all that. He is just a soul that is going to emit good forever, and he will not be penetrated by this world. It's like he's such a cool cat. You should dive in at some point and just see what he's all about, because he's what you're talking about. He goes from that Fats stride old world, but he's soul and Stevie and Ray and all these cats that were doing something different. And he mashed it together into a peanut butter jelly sandwich. It's just unreal.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. It's what I could give you examples. I wrote a lot with Leon Russell. Yeah. And we had all these piano players in common. We had like the same record collection. I always, really dug Leon and his style, especially those first few records. But it was in getting to know him and discovering that we had so many of the same influences. And Little Brother Montgomery is an example of a piano player who was not technically great, was a soulful player, but in a way he taught me how to play stride because the Fats Waller stuff and the Art Tatum stuff and even the Monk stuff was a little hard for me to really get a handle on because their left hands were going so fast. I'm left-handed, and once I heard what he was doing and he was breaking it apart, it made sense. Same thing with Memphis Slim had a particular style, and you can tell it's him. That's the thing I always wanted to be sure of in my playing. And I'm a stylist.
Yeah.
And you can hear it's me playing piano right away. From the first chord, how I hit it, there's no I don't think there's any doubt. I think if you've heard me and or you've seen me perform, you'll hear my playing immediately. It's regardless of whether I'm playing a jazz piece, a blues piece, a rock and roll piece, whatever it is, there's a certain approach. And to me, that's the greatest gift that I have, is to be recognizable as myself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful piano players that can copy Bill Evans and copy, Oscar Peterson and copy a lot of amazing Monk and Teddy Wilson and all kinds of genius players, and they can play on amazing sessions, but you wouldn't hear them and go, oh, that's so-and-so.
Yeah.
Because they haven't either had the interest in showing themselves or been brave enough to be different.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. At the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I think I'm a lot of things. First of all, I'm a human being, and I'm a father, I'm someone's, boyfriend. I'm a son. I'm a relative. I'm a friend. I'm a musician. I'm a performer. I'm a publisher. I run 2 record companies. I have a lot of hats that I wear, and I don't think any of them are mutually exclusive. They're all, it's kind of all fluid at the same time because it's had to be that way.
Yeah.
I kind of joke with my son, who's been, in LA for a number of years and acting and writing. And I always told him, I said, I just want you to have music to fall back on, because the bottom line is, I know that regardless of what happens, the trajectory of my career and the wild ride that it takes me on, I know that I can make myself happy and other people happy doing what I do, whether it's to a large audience, like I'll play in Kansas City, or whether it's, for 20 people.
Yeah.
And I think that being at peace with who I am and knowing that what I love and who I love and what's important, that's it. I think in performing, one of the greatest gifts that I have is to be able to perform to an audience and engage with people and have a really personal moment, without politics, without religion, without anything divisive. We have this beautiful gift in music to be able to let down our guards as performers and as an audience, and being able to just be real with the people I'm performing for, and it allows them to be real. Allows us to forget about what's outside that venue. We're all one for a couple hours, and that's really important to me.
Yeah. I love that answer. So I'm going to shuttle everybody to your website for tour dates. They want to catch you live, pick up the album, Any of the Good Business. So AJ, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for opening up. This has been wonderful. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much. Take care, man.
You too.
Joe Domino here, host of KC's Neon Jazz Radio. On International Jazz Day, April 30th, join us at the Music Hall in downtown Kansas City for the event of the year, 90 Years of Count Basie Swing. At 7 p.m., the world-famous Count Basie Orchestra takes the stage. From 5 to 7 p.m., it's a VIP reception with jazz legends and honorees. Finally, from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., join the after-party jam session at Lonnie's Reno Club inside the Ambassador Hotel. Tickets are moving fast. Get yours now at kccreativecity.com/count-basie. This event is part of International Jazz Day, supported by the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, with Kansas City proudly standing as America's only creative city of music. I'll see you there, Kansas City.